The first assault was olfactory, a nauseating plume of acrid smoke, the unmistakable stench of burning plastic and scorched electronics, a scent that clawed at Isabel Moreno's throat as she rounded the corner into the Golden Glen Estates Community Park. The second was auditory, a keening, repetitive vocalization from her 7-year-old daughter Olivia, a sound of such profound, raw distress that it bypassed Isabel's ears and struck directly at her heart. Livy, her small body rigid with a terror that transcended her usual autistic sensitivities, stood pointing a trembling finger towards the communal fire pit, a decorative stone structure usually reserved for HOA-sanctioned marshmallow roasts. Now flames licked at something metallic and dark, something that was unpleasantly, horrifyingly familiar. Isabel's world tilted. She recognized the ruggedized orange casing, the specific way the screen was now cracking and melting, oozing a black, viscous substance into the embers. It was Livy's iPad. Not just any iPad, but Livy's voice, her lifeline, the sophisticated, augmentative, and alternative communication device loaded with the customized VoiceLink app that allowed her non-verbal daughter to navigate a world that often refused to understand her silence. And beside the fire pit, calmly prodding the flames with a long metal poker, her expression one of serene, almost beatific satisfaction, was Mrs. Patricia Highgate, president of the Golden Glen Homeowners Association. "Ah, Commander Moreno, Mrs. Highgate," said her voice as smooth and cool as a pebble from a mountain stream. She didn't even glance at the distraught child. "Just tidying up a bit. Someone carelessly abandoned this electronic nuisance. Children should be encouraged to engage in wholesome outdoor play, not be tethered to those infernal screens." Besides, she added a dismissive flick of her wrist, sending a shower of sparks upwards. It was making such an irritating, unnatural bleeping noise, quite disruptive to the tranquility of the park. The bleeping noise had likely been Livy's attempt to call for help to use her voice app to articulate her distress as her most precious possession. Her only means of fluent communication was wrenched from her. The horror of it, the sheer calculated cruelty, threatened to buckle Isabel's knees. Her training, her years as a high-ranking law enforcement officer, the commander of the State Police Digital Crimes Division, warred with the primal incandescent rage of a mother witnessing the desecration of her child's very essence. Livy's communication wasn't just impaired, it was being incinerated before her eyes by a woman who equated a child's voice with an electronic nuisance. Isabel's mind, a finely honed instrument for dissecting complex digital crime scenes, began to record every detail: the acrid smell, the height of the flames, Mrs. Highgate's casual demeanor, the poker in her hand, Livy's catastrophic silent scream of a meltdown. This wasn't just vandalism. This wasn't just cruelty. This was the deliberate destruction of medical-assistive technology. This was a felony, and Mrs. Patricia Highgate, in her arrogant ignorance, had just committed it in front of a witness who not only understood the full weight of her crime, but possessed the authority to bring her to justice. The ashes of Livy's voice would become the embers of Patricia Highgate's undoing. Isabel Moreno lived a life of carefully managed dichotomies. By day, she was Commander Moreno, head of a sprawling division of the state police, a unit dedicated to combating the ever-evolving hydra of digital crime. From sophisticated cyber attacks on critical infrastructure and complex financial fraud, rings to the darkest corners of the internet where child exploitation lurked. Her world was one of encrypted data streams, forensic analysis of hard drives, and the pursuit of shadowy, faceless criminals who often believed themselves untouchable. She was respected, even feared, for her sharp intellect, her unwavering resolve, and her ability to bring order to the chaotic digital frontier. But at home, in the quiet tree-lined streets of Golden Glen Estates, she was simply Izzy, wife to Daniel, a patient and gifted software developer, and mother to Olivia, a child whose unique way of experiencing the world filled their lives with both profound challenges and immeasurable joy. Livy's autism diagnosis had come early, and with it, the understanding that her path would be different. She was nonverbal, or more accurately, her ability to produce spoken language was severely limited and unreliable, especially under stress. Her true voice, her vibrant inner world, had been unlocked by the VoiceLink app on her specially adapted iPad. Daniel had spent countless hours customizing the interface, tailoring the vocabulary, linking symbols to phrases, creating a digital bridge between Livy's thoughts and the world around her. It was her constant companion, her means of requesting her favorite dinosaur chicken nuggets, of telling her parents, "I love you," of participating in her specialized classroom at school, of expressing her fears, her joys, her very identity. It was in the most literal sense her voice. They had moved to Golden Glen a year prior, drawn by its reputation for good schools, its expansive green spaces, and its promise of a safe, family-oriented environment. The HOA, presided over by the redoubtable Mrs. Patricia Highgate, had seemed initially a standard feature of suburban life, its newsletters filled with reminders about lawn maintenance and seasonal planting guidelines. Isabel, accustomed to far more complex and menacing adversaries, had paid it little mind. The first inkling that Mrs. Highgate's obsession with community standards might extend into more problematic territory had come a few weeks before the fire pit incident. Livy had been in the small community park, happily using her VoiceLink app on her iPad to tell Daniel about a ladybug she'd found. Mrs. Highgate had approached her smile thin and brittle. "Mr. Moreno," she'd said, her voice dripping with a cloying sweetness that failed to mask its underlying disapproval. "Such a lovely afternoon for outdoor play. It's a shame to see young Olivia glued to that device. We at Golden Glen strongly encourage our children to engage in unplugged activities, to interact with nature and, of course, with each other, using their own natural voices." Daniel, ever patient, had tried to explain. "Mrs. Highgate, this isn't just a toy for Livy. It's her communication device. It's how she talks to us, how she tells us what she needs or feels." Highgate's smile had not wavered, but her eyes had hardened. "Indeed, a fascinating modern approach. However, the repetitive electronic sounds it emits can be somewhat disruptive to the tranquil atmosphere we strive to maintain in our shared green spaces. And frankly, one worries that such reliance on technology might hinder a child's development of more conventional communication skills, perhaps if she were encouraged more." The implication that Livy's autism and her reliance on her AAC device were somehow a failure of parenting, a lack of discipline, had infuriated Daniel, though he'd kept his response polite but firm. Isabel, when he recounted the incident later, had felt a familiar chill. It was the casual cruelty of ignorance, the dismissal of a child's essential needs in favor of some ill-defined, arbitrary standard of normalcy. That encounter had been the inciting incident, the first subtle but clear indication that Mrs. Highgate viewed Livy's iPad not as a lifeline, but as an aberration, an unsightly blight on her perfectly curated community. Now, standing before the smoking pyre of that lifeline, Livy's anguished, non-verbal cries tearing through the otherwise placid park, Isabel knew that Highgate's prejudice had festered into something far more malevolent. Isabel's voice, when she finally found it, was a low, dangerous snarl, every ounce of her maternal fury barely contained. She advanced on Highgate, who actually took an involuntary step back, her serene composure momentarily faltering at the sight of Isabel's blazing eyes. "What have you done?" "I merely disposed of an abandoned piece of electronic litter," Commander Moreno Highgate said, recovering quickly her tone, now laced with a defensive hauteur. She had, of course, known of Isabel's profession, though clearly had no concept of its scope or power, likely dismissing it as some sort of glorified IT management. It was left unattended on a park bench, a hazard, and as I mentioned, making a most irritating noise. Abandoned Isabel's voice was incredulous. Livy was 10 feet away, trying to join a group of children at the swings. She set it down for 60 seconds. That iPad, Mrs. Highgate, was not litter. It was a registered, medically prescribed assistive communication device, vital for my autistic daughter's ability to function and communicate. It cost over $2,000 to purchase and customize. It contained years of her personalized vocabulary, her communication history, her very voice, and you burned it. The sheer barbarity of the act was still struggling to find purchase in her brain. Isabel was already documenting with her own phone, quick, precise photos of the fire pit, the melting iPad, Mrs. Highgate's proximity, the poker she still held. Her digital crimes division training kicked in, secure the scene, preserve the evidence, document every detail. Livy, overwhelmed, had collapsed into a heap, her small body rocking her cries, now a series of choked, hiccuping gasps. Daniel, alerted by the commotion from their nearby house, came running, his face paling in horror as he took in the scene. He scooped Livy into his arms, his eyes meeting Isabel's over their daughter's head, a silent question, a shared outrage. Isabel dialed 911. Her voice was clipped professional, giving her name, her location, and the nature of the incident. "This is Commander Isabel Moreno, State Police. I am reporting the malicious destruction of medical-assistive technology and requesting immediate officer assistance at Golden Glen Estates Community Park. The perpetrator is on scene." She knew using her title in this context was a significant step, but the nature of the crime and her unique position to understand its gravity demanded it. Officer Miller. The first local patrolman to arrive looked young, nervous, and thoroughly unprepared for the scene that greeted him: a distraught child, two furious parents, a smirking HOA president, and a state police commander pointing at a fire pit containing the charred remains of an expensive electronic device. "Commander Moreno," he stammered, clearly recognizing her from departmental briefings or her photo. What's going on here?" Isabel laid it out, her voice cold and precise, detailing Mrs. Highgate's actions, the nature of the iPad as Livy's voice, and the specific state statutes regarding the destruction of medical-assistive technology, statutes she herself had helped draft and advocate for. "Officer Miller," she concluded, "I want Mrs. Highgate arrested for felony destruction of property, specifically designated assistive medical technology, and for reckless endangerment and infliction of emotional distress upon a vulnerable child." Mrs. Highgate, however, was already launching her defense, her voice a symphony of injured innocence and righteous indignation. "Arrest me, Commander. This is preposterous. I am the victim here. This woman is clearly unhinged. She's using her position to harass me over a discarded piece of electronic trash. I was simply maintaining the cleanliness and order of our community park, a duty entrusted to me by the residents of Golden Glen." She even attempted to portray herself as concerned for Livy. That poor child. Perhaps if her mother spent less time on vendettas and more time on proper parenting, the child wouldn't need such crutches. The insult, so casually delivered, so steeped in ignorance and malice, made Isabel see red. But before she could respond, Daniel stepped forward, his voice trembling with a barely controlled fury. "That crutch, Mrs. Highgate, was my daughter's voice. You didn't just burn a piece of plastic. You stole her ability to speak, to connect, to be understood. You ripped out her tongue and threw it in the fire. Do you have any comprehension of the damage you've done?" Officer Miller, caught between a furious state police commander and an equally furious and influential in local circles HOA president, looked like he wanted the earth to swallow him. He took copious notes, photographed the scene again, and spoke into his radio requesting a supervising officer and a detective. He did not, however, immediately arrest Mrs. Highgate, citing the need for a more thorough investigation given the conflicting statements and the unusual nature of the alleged crime. Isabel understood he was out of his depth, but she also knew that this was just the beginning. The battle for Livy's voice for justice had just begun, and Patricia Highgate had no idea of the digital storm that was about to break over her perfectly ordered, technologically averse world. The immediate aftermath was a blur of procedural necessities and raw, unvarnished grief. Detective Rodriguez, a sharp, experienced investigator from the local PD, arrived and took over the scene, her demeanor professional and appropriately grave once Isabel had walked her through the specifics of assistive technology laws and the profound impact on Livy. Mrs. Highgate, after being formally interviewed, during which she stuck to her story of finding an abandoned broken toy and tidying up, was allowed to return to her home, a temporary reprieve that galled Isabel to her core, though she understood Rodriguez needed to build an airtight case before making an arrest, especially given Highgate's local prominence and litigious reputation. The charred remains of the iPad were carefully collected, bagged as evidence. Isabel knew that even if the device was beyond repair, her own digital crimes division might be able to extract some data from the damaged chips, perhaps the last words Livy had typed, a digital ghost of her stolen voice. The true devastation, however, was Livy. The loss of her iPad, her voice link, was catastrophic. It was as if her primary bridge to the world had been dynamited. She retreated into a profound silence, her usual bright, observant eyes clouded with a fear and confusion that tore at Isabel and Daniel. She refused to eat, to sleep, her small body racked with tremors, her distress manifesting in bouts of intense stimming or heartbreaking silent tears. The carefully constructed routines that gave her world predictability and safety were shattered. Daniel, His software expertise, now a source of agonizing frustration, worked tirelessly to set up a replacement iPad to reload the VoiceLink app. But the customization had been so specific, so tailored to Livy's unique lexicon and communication patterns over years of use, that much of the nuanced programming was lost. The new device felt alien to Livy, its generic voice, an unfamiliar interface only adding to her distress. She pushed it away, her frustration a tangible wave in the room. Dr. Anya Sharma, Livy's longtime speech and language pathologist and a close family friend, her children were playmates of Livy's in their better days, was appalled. Isabel Daniel, it's a trauma of profound magnitude for Livy. She said, her voice gentle but firm, after an emergency session where Livy had remained almost catatonic. That device wasn't just a tool. It was an extension of herself, her primary mode of agency and expression. To have it so violently, so senselessly destroyed, it's like having a part of her brain ripped out. The psychological impact will be significant and will require intensive ongoing therapy. And yes, I will provide any statement, any testimony, detailing its critical medical necessity and the devastating consequences of this act. Mrs. Highgate, meanwhile, far from showing remorse, launched a preemptive strike. An emergency HOA newsletter penned with her signature blend of saccharine condescension and steely admonition appeared in every Golden Glen mailbox. It spoke vaguely of an unfortunate incident in the park involving an unattended electronic device and used it as a pretext to announce a new clarified HOA policy. To preserve the natural tranquility and encourage wholesome screen-free play in our community's shared green spaces, the use of personal electronic devices by children under the age of 12 in common areas will henceforth be strictly prohibited. Parents are urged to foster traditional modes of communication and interaction. It was a direct, vindictive jab, a clear attempt to legitimize her actions and further isolate the Moreno family. Then came the anonymous poison pen comments on the neighborhood social media page, which Isabel usually ignored, but now monitored with a grim sense of duty. Some parents just use those screens as babysitters. If the kid can't talk, maybe they should stay home. It's not fair to the rest of us to have to listen to those robot voices. The insidious whispers, clearly fanned by Highgate and her allies, began to create a chilling effect. A few previously friendly neighbors now offered only curt nods, their eyes skittish. The next escalation was more direct. Livy had a small, colorful sensory tent. She loved a safe space she would retreat to in their own backyard when overwhelmed. One morning, Daniel found it slashed to ribbons, the fabric cut with what looked like a box cutter. There was no direct proof it was Highgate, but the vindictive cruelty, the targeting of another of Livy's few comforts, bore her unmistakable signature. This was no longer just about the iPad. This was a campaign of psychological warfare. "That's it," Isabel said, her voice deadly calm as she surveyed the ruined tent. "She's not just destroying property anymore. She's actively trying to terrorize my child. She's creating a hostile environment, and she's going to find out that the Digital Crimes Division deals with more than just hackers and dark web marketplaces. We also deal with predators who use technology or the destruction of it to harm the vulnerable." While Detective Rodriguez continued to build the local criminal case, a process Isabel knew could take weeks, if not months, to reach an arrest, let alone a conviction, Isabel began to explore other avenues. She consulted with her own legal team at the state police, specifically regarding the interpretation of statutes related to assistive technology cyberstalking, given the online comments and the potential for federal involvement, if Highgate's actions could be construed as a hate crime or a violation of ADA protections in common areas managed by an HOA, which often function as quasi-public spaces. Mr. Caldwell, the retired judge who lived a few doors down, a quiet, observant man with a keen legal mind, approached Isabel one evening as she was retrieving her mail. "Commander Moreno," he said, his voice low and discreet, "I've been observing Mrs. Highgate for many years. Her obsession with control her, intolerance for anything that deviates from her narrow worldview, it has grown increasingly concerning. I overheard her at the last HOA Garden Club meeting before this dreadful incident with your daughter's device. She was complaining vociferously about that Moreno child's infernal machine, calling it an eyesore and an abomination against natural childhood. She even said something to the effect of, someone ought to put a stop to it. It was quite venomous. I'd be willing to provide a sworn affidavit to that effect if it would be of assistance. His offer was a significant boon. It established Highgate's premeditated animus, a crucial element for proving intent. The Sharma family Livy's friend's parents also came forward. They had seen Mrs. Highgate watching Livy in the park on the day of the incident, her expression like a hawk watching a field mouse, and had witnessed her snatch the iPad from the bench, where Livy had momentarily placed it, while trying with great effort to join a game of tag. Their eyewitness account of the actual theft was invaluable. Armed with these new statements, Dr. Sharma's comprehensive report on the medical necessity of the VoiceLink iPad and her own deep knowledge of both digital forensics and the relevant statutes, Isabel prepared for her own direct intervention. The local case was important, but it might not fully address the specific heinous nature of destroying a child's digital voice, a crime that blurred the lines between property damage assault and profound psychological abuse. The state statute regarding the malicious destruction of critical assistive technology, a law her own division had provided technical input on during its drafting, was broad and carried severe penalties, including felony charges. And as a sworn state police commander, she had the authority to make arrests for violations of state law anywhere within the state. The question was not if she could act, but when and how to ensure it was done impeccably, leaving Highgate's expensive lawyer no loopholes to exploit. The opportunity, or rather the necessity for direct action, was precipitated by Highgate herself. Perhaps feeling the pressure of the ongoing police investigation, or simply consumed by her own vindictive righteousness, she made a critical error. She sent an email to the entire Golden Glen Estates HOA membership. In it, she decried the campaign of harassment against her by the Moreno family, dismissed the iPad incident as a misunderstanding over abandoned property, and then chillingly reiterated the HOA's new policy prohibiting children's electronic devices in common areas, adding a new handwritten-looking addendum at the bottom of the scanned attachment. And frankly, some children simply aren't suited for community living if their parents cannot manage their deficiencies without resorting to disruptive and unnatural technological crutches. Perhaps a more contained environment would be appropriate for such families. The email was a digital smoking gun. It was a clear, documented act of discrimination, a public statement of her prejudice, and a thinly veiled threat. Isabel's team at the Digital Crimes Division, at her carefully firewalled request for technical assistance on an anonymized case study, quickly verified the email's origin, its unaltered state, and its metadata, confirming it had originated from Highgate's personal IP address and had been sent at a specific time. This was not just an HOA newsletter. This was evidence of discriminatory intent broadcast to hundreds. Isabel conferred with the state's attorney Asa Davies, a seasoned prosecutor she had worked with on numerous complex digital cases. She laid out the entirety of the evidence, the park video, the eyewitnesses, Mr. Caldwell's affidavit, Dr. Sharma's report, the destroyed sensory tent, and now this damning email. Asa Davies. Isabel said, her voice devoid of personal emotion. All professional commander. Now Mrs. Highgate's actions constitute a clear violation of State Penal Code 273.9, malicious destruction of medical-assistive technology, a felony. Her ongoing harassment, culminating in this discriminatory email, also suggests violations of state civil rights statutes and potentially constitutes cyberstalking and infliction of emotional distress. The local PD is building their case, but this email specifically provides unequivocal proof of intent and malice that elevates this. I believe I have probable cause as a sworn state law enforcement officer to effect an arrest under 273. 9. I am requesting your concurrence before I proceed to ensure full coordination with your office for prosecution. ASA. Davies reviewed the file, his expression growing grimmer with each page. He looked at the email, then at Isabel. Commander Moreno, he said slowly, you not only have probable cause, you have a moral imperative. This woman's actions are beyond reprehensible. Yes, you have my full concurrence. Proceed with the arrest. My office will be ready to file charges the moment she is booked, and we will throw the entire book at her. That afternoon, Commander Isabel Moreno, accompanied by her trusted second-in-command, Lieutenant Kenji Tanaka, as per state police protocol for an officer potentially making an arrest in a case with personal involvement, ensuring impeccable procedure and witness corroboration, drove to Golden Glen Estates. They were not in a marked patrol car, but in Isabel's official unmarked state vehicle. Isabel was in her crispest uniform, her badge and sidearm, visible her demeanor, one of absolute, unwavering authority. Mrs. Patricia Highgate answered her door, a look of surprise, quickly morphing into her customary sneer when she saw Isabel. "Commander Moreno, to what do I owe this dramatic reappearance? Have you come to apologize for your baseless accusations and the distress you've caused this community?" "Mrs. Highgate." Isabel said, her voice calm, cold, and utterly devoid of any personal animosity, only the dispassionate authority of the law. "Patricia Highgate, I am placing you under arrest for the violation of State Penal Code 273.9, the felony destruction of medical-assistive technology, and for violations of State Civil Rights Code, specific statute number, related to discrimination and harassment targeting a disabled minor." She stepped forward, Lieutenant Tanaka, moving to flank her. "You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you. Do you understand these rights, as I have read them to you?" The color drained from Patricia Highgate's face. Her mouth opened, then closed, a choked gurgling sound emerging. The HOA president, the neighborhood tyrant, the woman who believed herself above reproach, was suddenly face to face with the full, uncompromising power of the state wielded by the very woman whose child she had so cruelly, so casually harmed. The carefully constructed facade of her authority shattered, revealing the frightened, malevolent bully underneath. Her reign of digital darkness was over. The arrest of Patricia Highgate by a state police commander in her own impeccably manicured front yard in the heart of Golden Glen Estates sent shockwaves of disbelief and dawning comprehension through the community. Lieutenant Tanaka, with professional dispassion, handcuffed a sputtering, incoherent Mrs. Highgate, while Isabel calmly informed her that her digital devices, her computer, her phone, any tablets, would be seized under a warrant that was at that very moment being signed by a judge based on the evidence of the discriminatory email and other potential digital footprints related to the crime. The Digital Crimes Division would be doing a thorough forensic examination. Highgate's expensive lawyer, Alistair Finch, arrived as she was being placed in Isabel's unmarked vehicle, his face a mask of theatrical outrage. He blustered about unlawful arrest abuse, of power conflict of interest, but Isabel, with ASA Davies's full backing and the letter of the law clearly on her side, remained impassive. The arrest was by the book, the charges serious and well documented. The booking process at the state police barracks was a far cry from the deferential treatment Patricia Highgate was accustomed to. Fingerprinted, photographed, stripped of her cashmere cardigan and pearls, she was just another alleged felon facing the impersonal machinery of justice. The news of her arrest, particularly the involvement of the State Police Digital Crimes Division commander as both victim and arresting officer, a detail the media seized upon with relish, made headlines across the state. The Golden Glen HOA board imploded. Highgate's cronies, terrified of being implicated in her discriminatory practices or potential financial misdeeds, which ASA Davies was now also investigating based on information Isabel's team had peripherally uncovered, scrambled to distance themselves. An emergency meeting was called, and a new interim board, headed by a shaken but resolute Mr. Caldwell, the retired judge, was appointed with a clear mandate: full cooperation with all investigations, a complete overhaul of HOA bylaws, and a public, unreserved apology to the Moreno family. For Livy, the news of Mrs. Highgate's arrest, explained gently by Isabel and Daniel, brought a subtle but perceptible shift. The ever-present shadow of fear in her eyes seemed to lessen. She still grieved for Clover for her lost voice, but the knowledge that the mean lady was no longer in a position to harm her, that her mother, her superhero, had taken decisive action, created a small, safe space for healing to begin. She even tentatively touched the new iPad, allowing Daniel to show her some of the re-customized voice-link features. The legal battle was intense. Alistair Finch fought tooth and nail, filing motion after motion to suppress evidence to discredit Isabel to have the charges dismissed. But ASA Davies, armed with the meticulous case file prepared by Isabel's division, now formally handled by other agents, to avoid conflict of interest in the prosecution phase, though Isabel remained the primary witness for her arrest, and the initial crime countered every move. The digital forensic evidence from Highgate's seized devices proved damning. Deleted search queries from the weeks before the incident showed her researching how to permanently disable an iPad are AAC apps considered medical devices, and even chillingly, is burning electronics illegal? Fragments of deleted emails and social media drafts revealed the depth of her animosity towards Livy's use of technology and her contempt for children with disabilities. The discriminatory email she had sent to the HOA was the poison cherry on top. The trial, when it finally occurred months later, was a landmark event. It was one of the first major prosecutions under the state's relatively new statute protecting medical-assistive technology. Isabel's testimony was powerful, a compelling blend of a mother's pain and a law enforcement commander's precise factual recounting of the crime and its investigation. Daniel spoke eloquently of Livy's reliance on her voice link and the devastating impact of its loss. Dr. Anya Sharma provided expert testimony that left the jury in no doubt as to the profound psychological harm inflicted upon Livy, explaining how the iPad was not a toy, but an essential extension of her disabled daughter's ability to exist in the world. Mr. Caldwell and the Sharmas corroborated Highgate's pattern of discriminatory behavior and her premeditated malice. The defense's attempts to portray Highgate as a well-meaning but misunderstood community leader, a victim of a personal vendetta by an overzealous state official, crumbled under the weight of the evidence. Highgate herself, when she took the stand against her lawyer's advice, proved to be her own worst enemy. Her carefully rehearsed script of remorse quickly dissolved under ASA Davies's relentless cross-examination, revealing the arrogant, prejudiced, and utterly unrepentant individual beneath. Her contemptuous dismissal of Livy's needs as an inconvenience and her assertion that she was merely upholding standards horrified the jury. The verdict was swift and unanimous, guilty on all counts. Felony destruction of medical-assistive technology, infliction of emotional distress upon a minor, and several lesser charges related to her attempts to obstruct the investigation. At the sentencing, the judge delivered a scathing denunciation of Highgate's cruelty, her abuse of power, and her profound lack of empathy. Patricia Highgate was sentenced to 5 years in state prison with an additional 5 years of supervised probation upon release. She was ordered to pay full restitution for the destroyed iPad, all of Livy's therapy costs, and a substantial sum in punitive damages. She was also permanently barred from holding any position of authority in any community organization and from owning any animals, as her callousness was deemed a potential risk. Golden Glen Estates, under its new leadership, embarked on a journey of transformation. Discriminatory bylaws were rescinded. New initiatives promoting inclusivity, neurodiversity awareness, and responsible technology use were implemented. The community park, once the scene of such ugliness, now featured a communication corner with a weatherproof communication board displaying common symbols and words, a project inspired by Livy and championed by the Sharma family and Mr. Caldwell. Livy's healing was a slow, ongoing process. She eventually embraced her new, upgraded voice link device, her digital voice growing stronger and more confident each day. The trauma of Clover's the rabbit. From a previous prompt, I should make sure to use the correct name from this story's context if it was mentioned. In this case, the device was just Livy's voice. Destruction was a scar she would always carry, but it no longer defined her. She found joy in her art, in her friendships, and in her ability to once again make herself heard. One sunny afternoon, months later, Isabel watched Livy in their backyard. Livy was talking animatedly with her new voice link to Daniel, her laughter, a beautiful melodic sound facilitated by the synthesized voice echoing through the trees. She was showing him a drawing. She had made a vibrant picture of herself standing tall with a speech bubble emanating from a brightly colored iPad, the words "I have a voice" emblazoned in bold letters. Around her, a community of diverse smiling faces, and in the corner, a small, dark, burning fire pit, but with a large, emphatic red X drawn through it. Isabel's eyes filled with tears, not of sorrow, but of a profound, fierce pride. The battle had been brutal, the cost immense, but Livy had found her voice again, stronger and more resilient than before. And in the heart of Golden Glen Estates, a community had learned a vital lesson that true tranquility comes not from enforced uniformity or the suppression of difference, but from empathy, understanding, and the unwavering defense of every individual's right to be heard, respected, and safe. Commander Isabel Moreno, mother and law enforcement leader, knew that this victory born from ashes would resonate far beyond their small suburban street.